I'm going to begin this homily by reading to you Thomas Hardy's poem, By the Earth's Corpse. O Lord, why grievest thou, since life has ceased to be upon this globe, now cold as lunar land and sea, and humankind and fowl and fur are gone eternally? All is the same to thee as ere they knew mortality. O time, replied the Lord, thou readst me ill, I ween. Were all the same, I should not grieve at that late earthly scene, now blessedly past, though planned by me with interest close and keen. Nay, nay, things are not now the same as they have earlier been. Written indelibly on my eternal mind are all the wrongs endured by earth's poor patient kind, which my too oft unconscious hand let enter undesigned. No God can cancel deeds foredone, or thy old coils unwind. As when in Noah's days I whelmed the plains with sea, so at this last, when flesh and herbs but fossils be, and all extinct, their piteous dust revolves obliviously, that I made earth and life and man, it still repenteth me. I did not discover this poem by Thomas Hardy until a year or so ago. I had signed up for an Oasis class on Hardy's poems, and while I was looking for the ones we were supposed to read for the class, I found the poem I just read you. I have no idea what influenced Hardy, although it wouldn't surprise me to discover that he had read Darwin's Origin of Species, published in 1859. But Darwin was not the first naturalist to consider the possibility that the Garden of Eden and Noah's Ark were just stories. One of the sources I read referred to Ralph Waldo Emerson's 1836 essay, Nature, in which he says, "Nature is always consistent, though she feigns to contravene her own laws. She keeps her laws and seems to transcend them. She arms and equips an animal to find its place and living in the earth, and at the same time she arms and equips another animal to destroy it. The direction is forever onward, but the artist still goes back for materials and begins again with the first elements on the most advanced stage. Otherwise, all goes to ruin." Emerson was a transcendentalist and had planned to be a minister, but very early on, more than 30 years before Darwin's Origin of Species, Emerson had begun to use evolutionary language to describe the organization of life on this planet. His contemporary and friend, Moncure Conway, a minister with his own religious crises, remarks in his autobiography, "We who studied him," that is Emerson, "were building our faith on evolution before Darwin came to prove our foundations strictly scientific." And in his Emerson at Home and Abroad, he dwells for several pages on the Darwinian aspects of Emerson's thought. It was perfectly clear to him that the method of nature is evolution, and it organized the basis of his every statement. Conway even recognized what we would now describe as Emerson's existentialism. The old phrases, supreme architect, almighty, providence, had become fossil to him whose deity had become subjective. Yet there is almost no comment about Darwin in all of Emerson's writing, although he appears to have obtained or read a copy of Origin. Darwin's voyage on the government ship HMS Beagle from 1831 to 1836 gave him an opportunity to consider such ideas as the relations of animals on the mainland to those of adjacent islands, as well as the relation of living animals to the fossil remains of the same species. When Darwin encountered the Native Americans in South America, the difference between them and civilized Europeans started him thinking about the concept of evolution. Also, he realized that the rock layers in the Andes couldn't possibly have been there only 4,400 years. He was fortunate to have as colleagues and friends the great English geologist Charles Lyell and the botanist Sir Joseph Hooker. These scientists encouraged him to write about the discoveries he made while he was sailing on the Beagle. He came to understand that certain facts could only be explained on the supposition that species gradually become modified. This led him to the concept of selection, which made sense if he applied it to domesticated plants and animals. In this case, the selection could be arranged by breeders and farmers. It was much more difficult to come up with a theory that applied to wild plants and animals. One day, while reading Malthus on population, it suddenly occurred to him how, in the struggle for existence, which he had everywhere observed, favorable variations would tend to be preserved and unfavorable ones destroyed. The result would be a formation of new species. He says, "Here then, I had at last a theory by which to work." We are living in a time when the concept of an all-powerful God who has made everything and expects us to behave in a certain way, which, by the way, varies depending on the religious group to which one might belong, is gradually giving way to a new and, for many of us, more reasonable spirituality based on evolution. All early origin stories, the creation of the earth in 6 days, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, are limited by the knowledge and understanding of the people who came up with the stories, and by the messages that the leaders felt they needed to convey to the tribe. It was much easier to say that God did something or requires you to behave in a certain way, because obviously real knowledge was limited. When, as an undergraduate, I studied history of science, it quickly became evident to me that many scientific ideas are limited by the observed knowledge of the person or people who come up with the theory. In my estimation, one of the most obvious theories to question is the Big Bang. The scientists who arrived at this theory were doing the best they could with the knowledge they had, but as time has gone by, it becomes more and more possible to consider that this is not how the universe happened. If one rejects the idea of an all-powerful God, it makes being a member of a religious group, or even believing in God, very difficult. But do not give up. If you are still sitting in this sanctuary, you know that as a Unitarian Universalist, you have the ability to chart your own spiritual path. I want to introduce you to the recent ideas of the Reverend Michael Dowd. Some of you may remember he and his wife visiting us several years ago to share some of their ideas with us. There are a lot of resources about Michael online, but I want to share with you a simple version of his faith statement. And I can actually say this and mean it. Reality is my God. Evidence is my scripture. Big history is equivalent to the creation story. Ecology is equivalent to theology. And integrity is equivalent to salvation. Believing this statement ensures a just and healthy mission. So, right relationship to reality, the air, water, and soil of the planet, and awareness of the future is what ultimately matters. Through the synthesis of religion and science, science gives a more powerful reality than religion ever can. So try this idea. Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, will not go away. Nature is real, and we must live in right relationship with what is real. so that we may have a spiritual connection with the universe in which we exist. For those of us who have extreme difficulty accepting the Word of God as given by authority figures and the scriptures of our religious groups, Michael Dowd's explanation of God as reality allows us to understand how our universe works and what our place in it is. Science is the explanation of what is happening, and it calls on us to work towards the protection of our world and to care for our fellow creatures. Blessed be.
When I was about 12 years old, I earned money by delivering about 100 newspapers after school each day on my bicycle, throwing one newspaper at a time on the doorstep of each house. I could throw a newspaper from about here to where the sound booth as I rode my bike at 12 years old. Now, with the money I earned, I purchased a 2¼ refractor telescope. A few of the kids in the neighborhood had telescopes, so we formed an astronomy club. We met many Friday nights and stargazed, looking at the rings around Saturn and having a wonderful feeling when we captured the Andromeda Nebula in our telescopes. Even then, I found more inspiration in searching the heavens with a telescope than in listening to answers from a catechism about what was in store if I made it to heaven. I've moved on and currently have an interest in reading books on the subjects of evolution and spirituality. Recently, I was struck by the excellent prose of author Annie Dillard on these subjects. In her book, Teaching a Stone to Talk, she reflects on the impact of science on religion when she writes, "Nature's silence is its one remark, and every flake of world is a chip off that old mute and immutable. God used to rage at the Israelites for frequenting sacred groves. I wish I could find one. Now we are no longer primitive. Now the whole world seems not holy. We have drained the light from the boughs in the sacred grove and snuffed it in the high places and along the banks of sacred streams. We as a people have moved from pantheism to pan-atheism. Silence is not our heritage, but our destiny. We live where we want to live." When Annie Dillard says, "Now we are no longer primitive, now the whole world seems not holy," this is a reflection of a stance taken as a result of science, namely Darwin's theory of evolution, which cracked the biblical foundations of traditional creation beliefs. When she says, "We have drained the light from the boughs in the sacred grove and snuffed it in the high places and along the banks of sacred streams," her prose sheds light on the tragedy of losing our revered creation myths to the harsh scrutiny of scientific analysis. What was a believer to do? Give up the creation story and leave behind the attachment to a theology that offered security, one that provided a simplistic explanation of humankind's origin and a direct relationship with a personal God? Since the tenets of a belief system were under attack, battle lines had to be drawn. Thus has ensued the raging battle between the creationists and evolutionists, religion versus science. Does it have to be this way? Before I answer that question, I think we should consider the life and work of the French theologian and scientist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Here are a few snapshots about his life. He was born in France in 1881 and the fourth of 11 children. He studied philosophy and mathematics in college and entered the path to become a Jesuit priest. He spent 3 years teaching at Jesuit College in Cairo, Egypt. He went on geological field trips while there. He became a priest in 1911. He studied theology at Hastings, England. While there, he read Henri Bergson's Creative Evolution and was greatly influenced by it. The book would later be put on the Vatican's Index of Forbidden Works. From 1915 till 1918, he was a stretcher bearer during the Great War. During the war, Teilhard wrote letters to his cousin and sent her many of his essays. The essays caught the attention of his Jesuit superior because of their unorthodox theology: no Adam and Eve, no original sin, and no creation ex nihilo. After the war, he completes his formal education with degrees in botany, zoology, and a doctorate in geology. He continues to write privately about topics on original sin, and the Holy Fathers in Rome are very concerned with his views and also his growing popularity. Because of his writings, he is quasi-exiled to China in 1926 as a missionary. While there, he writes his spiritual masterpiece, The Divine Milieu. In 1929, he plays a major role in the expedition that discovered the Peking Man. And in 1938, Teilhard begins writing his magnum opus, The Human Phenomenon, and completes it in 1940. For Teilhard, disbelief in evolution is unthinkable. It is the light illuminating all facts, and especially the human phenomenon. His theology views God as the omega point to which all consciousness is moving toward through an evolutionary process. The Vatican refuses permission to publish his religious philosophical works. Unofficial copies known as clandestine circulated, and Teilhard's views grow in popularity. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin dies of a heart attack in New York City on April 10th, 1955. Now, before I discuss the idea of spirituality and evolution, I want to point out something. Have you noticed how much the word spirit permeates our worship services these days? There are hymns galore that speak of it. Spirit of life, gather the Spirit. From the gathering chant, Spirit draw near. From the lone wild bird, Great Spirit, come and rest in me. I could probably cite quite a few more. The point is that spirit and spirituality have a presence in our worship services. With this in mind, I contend that we should consider Teilhard's perspective on evolution and spirituality. Teilhard saw spirituality riding time's arrow on the evolutionary process. He saw that beyond the biosphere was what he called the noosphere, a sphere where beyond the biosphere was a world of consciousness that connected us in some spiritual way with the universe and its source. Humans brought spirit into the equation and connected us with the universe through increased consciousness driven by love. You may call it by many names. He saw the omega point as a place where evolution reaches its conclusion by a union with a God image. His view gives our actions meaning beyond the immediate. It's similar to that quote, "The arc of history bends toward justice." Teilhard's philosophical and spiritual perspective may require a leap of faith and hope, especially in the light of all the violence in the world today. Jane Goodall, in her book Reason for Hope, A Spiritual Journey, mused about the dilemma when she said, "There are really only two ways, it seems to me, in which we can think about our existence here on earth. We either agree with Macbeth that life is nothing more than a tale told by an idiot, a purposeless emergence of life forms, including the clever, greedy, selfish, and unfortunate species that we call Homo sapiens, the evolutionary goof. Or we believe that, as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin put it, there is something afoot in the universe, something that looks like gestation and birth. In other words, a plan, a purpose to it all." Spirituality, manifested through consciousness, resonates with some of us here. Brian Cox, the English astronomer, puts it very well. He says, "We are the cosmos made conscious, and life is the means by which the universe understands itself." Now, I'll close with a prayer Teilhard wrote. On New Year's Day in 1932, Teilhard conducted a worship service in the shadow of the Tian Shan Mountains in China. Men in sturdy boots and heavy winter coat with fur collars stood around him. In a Unitarian Universalist spirit, Teilhard said, "My dear friends, we are together this morning in this little church in the heart of China to begin in front of God the new year. God, for each one of us here, certainly does not have the same precise image. But since we are all men, we cannot escape, not one of us, a supreme energy exists. One that we must well recognize, because it is superior to us, the magnified equivalent of our intelligence and our will. It is in front of this powerful presence that we must collect ourselves for a moment at the start of this year. Of this universal presence which envelops us all, we first request to reunite us as in a common living center with those whom we love and who are starting, though far away from us, this new year. Consider the spiritual aspect of evolution as we sing our closing hymn now, and please rise in body or spirit, and we'll sing number 175, We Celebrate the Web of Life.